Spent a couple of days in Amsterdam and then got on it's like a river liner, a small river liner that runs on a boat. Very interesting experience from the people I've talked to who've done it. So they're over there until Thursday. So Hank got me over tonight and helped me get the sound system set up, and we were a little bit slow in getting started. I apologize, and our speaker, Calvin, has not made it in yet, so we're going to start up with a couple of us who have some things we can talk about a bit. But before we get started with that, does anybody have an announcement they need to make?
Jim, I just have a question. Have you all tried to call Calvin? Has somebody tried to telephone Calvin? Has someone tried to call Calvin? In case
I have not. I do not have his number. Tom failed to give it to me when they left town.
he could have forgotten or something.
I figured I had it stored in the phone, but I can't. It's not in there. I can't find it. So he may be down the street 2 blocks, but we don't know at this point. He's always very faithful about being here, so I don't know what's happened with him being late. But there are a couple of us who will have some things just to sort of open the program up. And Hank had first told me that he wanted to say a few things. So Hank, why don't you come on up and share some words of wisdom with us and make us wiser, brighter, and more knowledgeable than we are when we came. Thank you.
Hello. I came not to bury Calvin, but to praise him. Amen. But he ain't here. Hallelujah. Anyway, can you hear me? Yeah. I've been mulling over an idea that I was going to have visuals for, but I'm going to open up this subject anyway.
Spontaneous.
Yeah. Now, I'm noted for improvisation, so here it goes. What I'd like to raise is the topic of the quality of evidence. Today, especially with the internet, and a lot of internet stuff kind of contradicting the mainstream media, we have completely conflicting evidence and theories and so-called facts. So we have to choose. Which one are we going to listen to? Now, in the old days, it was pretty much Republican or Democrat. There wasn't that many options. But today, there's more options, and they're more convincing. You have computer graphics. You have people just putting all kinds of stuff on the internet, and we have to choose. Now, I come here sometimes, and I usually try to find something to argue about, but a lot of times that's based on just something I saw that was stated so declaratively on the internet. And the person who made the original statement is sure of themselves. So a lot of times it goes back to the original statements really conflict. I'll give you an example. It's a relevant example, I think. Global warming. You can go online and see things that say the ice is melting in the poles. Then you can see another one that says the ice is not melting on the poles. It's increasing. And then you can see one that says, well, the ice is melting in the North Pole, but that's because the government is trying to melt the ice caps to increase trade directly to Hamburg and Oslo. Anyway, a lot of them even state the same sources. Now, we are really, you got to think about this, we are at the mercy of so-called experts. The experts will tell you what's going on at the North Pole. We don't know what's going on at the North Pole. We don't know how many polar bears there are. We don't know if that footage was taken in the summer or the winter. And now it's the summer because Calvin's back.
Welcome.
Well, I apologize for being late. Caught up in a car accident. I lost 15 minutes, so that's why I'm late. I didn't have a car accident. Someone else had one. But, it did detain me also. Are we ready to get started? We ready?
Fire away, it's your pleasure.
Okay. My topic this afternoon is a solution to many of the challenges faced in America. And I have 5 different points I'd like to make. The first point is not coming through good.
No, let me get you into the mic just a little bit better.
Okay.
And I'll turn the volume up just a hair.
Okay.
It's kind of hard to judge until we got one of those speakers back further in the room so it'll reach those back seats. Okay, fire away.
As I indicated, I have 5 points I want to deal with, and one of the first point is, how can we make our politics reflect what's best in the United States and not what's worse? And my concern about this is the political discourse that's going on during this presidential year, where it's unlike any presidential election I've seen during my lifetime, and I've been observing presidential elections since 1960. My first voting was for President Kennedy in 1960. We have a representative democracy, and it does not mean that we should not have disagreements. Objective, relevant disagreements is good, and often those type of disagreements leads to better public policy than where everyone agree on something which may not be right. One of the other elements of a representative democracy is it's based on reason and really not on emotion, and shouldn't be totally based on ideology. But that's not true in a political discourse of this year. Democracy, a representative democracy requires a basic bond of trust between its citizens. Further, we must manifest our willingness to compromise. The current election process has trapped elected officials by the demands of getting reelected. Our system needs to change so that it works for all Americans. Many people complain about what Congress hasn't done, or what the president hasn't done, or what the Federal Reserve System hasn't done. And we as citizens have a responsibility. The Constitution gives the authority to the people. But when we permit ourselves to be polarized and don't focus on what's really important for the nation, it hurts all of us. So it's not just the politicians. It also involves the citizens. The citizens have a responsibility. When we don't vote, or if we vote wrong, there are consequences for that. And I think we are realizing some of the consequences of that now. National election should be publicly financed, so that, I'm getting ahead of myself. The next point I want to make is money in politics has corrupted our political system. As Tom often says, we have the best Congress that money can buy. And that's true. The way they give money is somewhat hidden, but it's true. Many people who spend their total public life in politics, former Governor Perry, and state legislatures make $7,200. That's been true for a number of years. And between the time of being in the state legislature, Governor Perry served 2 terms, I believe, as Agriculture Commission, and that job at that time paid about $100,000 a year. And then he went back into the Senate and became Lieutenant Governor, of which he went back to the $7,200. And then when former President Bush moved from governor of Texas to president, Governor Perry became governor. And as governor, they had some of the same prerogatives that the president has in the United States. We have a governor's mansion. We pay for everything. He has access to automobiles, airplanes, whatever he needs. And so I guess it could be like ministers used to be. Ministers used to have a parcelage, and they didn't have to pay utilities, nothing like that. And so they did okay if they got a fairly decent salary. So that's true of both the president and the governor of Texas. One of the problems we have, and recently, has been the Supreme Court decision, Citizens United decision, which said that money is free speech. And that created a situation where people with money can buy elections. I think the average person, based on law right now, can give $2,500 to a candidate. How many of us could afford to give $2,500 to 4 or 5 candidates? I know I can't. So that means that's geared to people who are very affluent. But with the Citizens United decision, you can, through some mechanism, political action groups, you can give huge amount of money. And one of the structures that we have now created by that decision is people pretend that they're doing something as a 501c3, and they get tax exempt status, in which it's clearly a political motivation. So we need the Supreme Court to reverse itself on Citizens United, or we need to pass a constitutional amendment revoking the Supreme Court decision, because that creates opportunity for the rich to determine what political decisions and what public policy is determined by the legislature. We remember that Northwest had a number of congressmen to sign an oath not to increase taxes, while all congressmen, in fact, all public officials, take an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States. So it's a situation here in which the legislatures, the Congress who signed that oath, has really violated the major oath that they took to uphold the Constitution. And that need to be prohibited. It's already prohibited by law, but if people don't contest it in court, it's as if it didn't happen. We need to have a way of educating voters, informing voters of the changes in our election process, so that they know what the real issues are, so that they can vote intelligently or wisely. We somewhat have that in public schools and public colleges in Texas and universities, where all students are required in the public colleges to take 6 hours political science or government, and that gives them some understanding of the political system. Civics in high schools in Texas, I think, has been made optional as an elective, but I believe most students still take civics. We need to try to take steps to encourage people to vote rather than making it difficult for them. We need to change the policy dealing with the voter identification that you need of state issue, picture ID. That is designed to keep certain groups of people from voting, and it makes it difficult. And a large number of people don't like to vote anyway. And if you're going to make it any trouble, they won't vote. And when we have a small small turnout, historically it's good for the Republican Party. If we have a high voter turnout, it seems to benefit the Democratic Party. So I believe if citizens understand what the issues are, they probably will vote intelligently or wisely. But in the system we have right now, many times they get carried away with the political discourse, and they find it easier to agree with the political discourse rather than think on their own behalf. And many people vote for political candidates of which they know their policy will hurt them. But they feel if they hurt some other group worse, then they're willing to be hurt themselves and they vote that way. So if they were voted, had some kind of way of training them, we have a number of organizations, it's possible, but right now it's not being done. So we need to try to remove money from politics, and so this will encourage all of us to recognize we have a stake in it. But we as citizens do have a responsibility to exercise our political freedom and vote for the candidates of our choice, and hopefully the candidates of our choice are ones who are concerned about what's in the national interest and not in some ideology that's not too relevant to our ongoing existence. The other issue we had a lot of discussion here about is the impact of globalization and what it's done to workers in the United States. We always cite outsourcing, relocating of major manufacturing companies from the United States to other nations such as China, Mexico, Central and South America, and in South Korea. And we actually have signed a trade agreement with similar to the North American Free Trade Agreement among Canada, Mexico, and the United States, similar to one for South Korea, Colombia, and Panama. And we focus on free trade, which is really not good for the United States. We should have fair trade where there's a negotiation which benefits both partners, all partners to the agreement, and not just one. And we need to be concerned about the working conditions in those agreements, so the people who are working in those countries that would have a more positive impact on the United States. We need to enact new legislation that will change the tax system, which currently encourage multinational corporations to relocate factories and outsource work to other nations. Multinational corporations to discourage them from outsourcing and recoding their factories to China, to the places that I identified earlier. We should require all multinational corporations to pay the cost of retraining all employees who've lost their job because of outsourcing or factory relocation. We should encourage multinational corporations to be good American citizens, since the Supreme Court said they're a person, to ensure that greed is not the dominant factor in their decision-making process. Rather, it ought to be what is in our national interest. The trade agreements, in many respects, based on the North American Free Trade Agreement, doesn't work in our national interest. It works in the interest of the multinational corporations who make huge profits at our expense, and we buy a lot of that stuff, which is not very good. It is imperative for corporate America to trade. Historically, we've always traded. However, it should be based on fair trade rather than free trade. Trade agreement must have reciprocal benefits to trading partners, which is not the case in the North American Free Trade Agreement. Since we have a deficit with both Canada and Mexico, there is a growing debate about how to cope with all of this. One discussion centers around a reconsideration of the mix of financing and manufacturing. In the U.S. economy, namely bolstering the latter, we should be focusing a great deal on manufacturing, because if a nation isn't manufacturing something, we don't have anything to export. And so that's what we're finding in now. Financing is important too, but manufacturing is more important. We need to develop an industrial policy that serves as a catalyst to encourage restoring manufacturing in the United States, investing in emerging technologies like microchips. But critics argue that this would amount to federal bureaucrats picking winners and losers. A 21st century version might instead look like a national growth and competitive strategy that would not only bolster workers hurt by globalization, but also put the United States in the best competitive position to advance high growth, high wage strategy sectors like digital technology and clean energy. We must manufacture products and services that we can export to other nations. The U.S. does not have such a strategy. We need to put labor standards and protection higher up the bilateral agendas with China and future trade agreements. We need to have access to Chinese markets for U.S. banks or protecting intellectual property. Is there any good news relative to this issue? The answer is yes. Policymakers around the world are taking a look at the past few decades of our trade agreements and the outcomes. There's a move to digital economy since global trade has begun to slow down from its usual growth rate. While the digital economy, the flow of digital information, including e-commerce, videos, intercompany communication, and searches, is rapidly growing, and small business are beginning to participate in the global digital economy. Those are some of the things that we should take in that area. We need to reform our unemployment system so that it does more than pay unemployment benefits and include retraining programs for employees who have lost their jobs stemming from outsourcing, technology, and robots. We need to fund infrastructure programs to address issues stemming from dams, bridges, and rail system. We need to increase the minimum wage and index it to the consumer price index and ensure equal pay for equal work. The third point is, how do we improve our public education system? I mean, the total, elementaries, middle schools, high schools, colleges, and universities. State and local school districts ought to adequately fund public education, including elementary, middle, and high schools, and play a better role in funding tuition at state universities to ensure that the total burden of higher education is not shifted to parents and students. This is an investment. Education is an investment, and it's not welfare in our future. The student loan program must be reformed so that it is a better balance between financial institutions and the excessive costs to students. Many students make errors in this. They go to a very expensive school, and when they graduate, they owe $50,000 to $100,000. That decision they made, they could have made a decision to go to a school that the cost was less, and a degree, in most cases, except the degree at any school, any university, college, university that is not under probation from the standards that are required. But for some reason, they make that decision, and then when the burden gets back to repaying it, they have a problem with it. But right now, the interest rates is really too high, and we can do something to lower that. And states need to become more involved. Texas used to be fairly well involved. Tuition wasn't so high, but because we had the economic situation in the 1980s and then the recession of 2008 and 9, states have let the universities use the tuition as they see fit to stay in business and cut and reduce state funding. In the public school system in Texas, in 2011, they reduced the budget for state funding by $5 billion. And in addition to that, a few years before that, they arbitrarily reduced public schools' property tax by 1/3. And they passed a franchise law that was supposed to pick up the difference. It never did. And that all was coupled with the recession that led to what they have done. And the case is at the state Supreme Court now because the unity school districts have sued. And in other cases dealing with equal funding of public education in Texas, the state was advised by the state Supreme Court that the state cannot have a state property tax. That's unconstitutional. And when the state passed a law reducing property tax by 1/3 without a referendum from the local school district, that's the same as a state property tax. And that's the question that the court is considering right now. The state has put about half of that money back into it, but the school population has grown and it still is inadequate. So we'll see what the court has to say about that. The other thing we need to deal with in public education is we base everything on a test. And in junior college, I see the impact of, observe the impact of the test. The way the test is designed for writing is you don't write that way in the private sector. And the students are going to have a real problem in writing, and almost in most jobs required to write or to orally make reports and things like that. They have very difficult for that. They start writing with no breaks, no subtopics. And they can do that as long as, they don't violate subject verb agreement and those mechanical things. But it really isn't something that a private company or a private employer would like. So the test is not what is going to help us, but the educators in Texas and throughout the United States, didn't do what they should have done. They should have been promoting changes that are relevant. The curriculum should be the driving force. The curriculum should be set up in such a way that once a student completes a course, there are certain outcomes expected. And rather than testing and based in teachers' pay and school districts rating on how many people pass the test, but the curriculum focus would do a better job. And that's one of the things I don't see educators or politicians talking about. They just talk about more tests. And what we have done, we have kind of nationalized the test with the No Child Left Behind legislation. The biggest thing, outcome there was everybody in the United States had to test. And when they started testing, school dropout rates increased, and students who graduated, companies complain they don't have the knowledge to work on the job. So that's something we need to work on. We need to make technology work for us and not against us when it comes to solving urgent challenges like climate change, the internet, and take bold new steps to get more students, low-income Americans, online, particularly in rural areas. We have access to fast internet in urban areas, but I know where I live, at one time I didn't have it here in Dallas. It would take a period of time to get there. And in rural communities, they don't have it, but they could have it if we make the investment in it. The other areas in medical science, with a more aggressive approach for preventive health and medical research to find solutions to chronic illness and expand energy production from fossil fuel to solar and wind. Those are some options we have in this situation. We have in the United States a weak preventive health. The only thing we do basically is immunization. And there are some challenges to immunization, but I think immunization has done a great deal to help in public health in the United States. And so I think we need to do more than just immunize people. But there are certain demographic groups that have a high propensity to have high blood pressure, diabetes, and other illness. And if we identify those groups of people earlier and try to get them involved in programs that would reduce that would decrease the cost of health care. Because once you get a chronic illness and you have to purchase medicine for high blood pressure or diabetes or cancer, it's very, very expensive. And there are some things you could do through preventive health that may lessen the cost in later years. My family has a high propensity to have high blood pressure from my mother's side of the family. But I wasn't diagnosed with high blood pressure until I was in my 50s, while young people are sometimes diagnosed with diabetes and high blood pressure in elementary school. So you can delay that diagnosis if you get the preventive help that's necessary. The fourth point was healthcare. For years and years, the United States was the only Western nation, so-called developed nation, who did not have some type of national health insurance program. We've had Medicare and Medicaid since 1964. And there was a lot of opposition to Medicare when it was enacted, and in Medicaid also. But those two programs, if a large segment of American people didn't have Medicare, they would not have access to any health care. And those people who qualify for Medicaid in Texas, if it's an intact family, it's like 50% of the poverty level to be eligible for it. Unless you just a mother with children or a father with children, and then with the child health insurance program, it's up to about 150% of poverty. But for the vast majority, it's lowered. We tried the affordable health care, we finally got that. It's not a perfect thing. It needs some improvements, but it's better than what we had. And the name of it is not the Obamacare, it's the Affordable Health Care Act. And what it's designed to do is to make health care accessible to those persons who work, but earn too much to qualify for Medicaid that it currently exists, and not enough to purchase insurance. The problems we have in the healthcare system before the enactment of the Affordable Care Act was that we had two types of rating systems for premiums. One was the experience rating system, where you look at the experience of the group. So if you had a small group and then you had someone needed a heart transplant, the premiums went out of reach for the people. The only group in Texas that deals with that are teachers. All the teachers of Texas, they get a good rate because it's a large number of them in Texas. But where you have a small group, you can't buy it because the community rating system was not used. The community rating system would look at all of North Texas as a community, and anybody could buy health insurance based on that premium. And you wouldn't have to, and then the other thing the Affordable Health Care says, you can't be denied, we'd already decided that you couldn't be denied health insurance because of pre-existing condition, but they made the premium so high, very few people could afford it. And so what the Affordable Health Care Act does is the premiums for people who have pre-existing condition is no higher than any other person. So we're really in what is called a community rating system under the Affordable Health Care Act. Now, if you weren't working for a small group employer who arranged for health insurance for you, and you was an individual trying to buy health insurance, you couldn't afford it. And then that's why they came up with some policies that don't cover very much. And those are the policies that were not permitted to exist with the Affordable Health Care Act. There are changes that need to be made in the Affordable Health Care Act. There is a pretty strong preventive health piece in the Affordable Health Care Act, but it needs to be more. And people argue about the law requires you, if you don't have health insurance, to purchase health insurance. And many people complain about that, but before the law was passed, everybody I met, I didn't meet everybody, wanted to be able to purchase health insurance, and they didn't see that as being infringing on their rights. But look at any life insurance, it's all large numbers. And that's why it's important for everybody to be in the system, so that everybody. And if you have a national health insurance program like the Affordable Health Care Act, and you don't have it, and you can't go to Parkland like you do now, but Parkland won't get the federal support like for uncompensated care like it does now. So the public hospitals will be expected to operate like any other hospital. And so that's why it's important. So you really don't have nowhere to go. And if you have health insurance bills, they can take you home. They can take anything you own to pay that bill. And that was before the Affordable Health Care Act. So it's not perfect, but I think it's better than what we had before. The fifth item is, how can we keep America safe and lead the world without becoming its policeman? We in America spend more for defense than Russia combined. Russia, China, India, Germany, France, England combined. We cannot afford that. That's too much expense for us. And so we need to think about what we can do to do that. We cannot sustain this level of spending for defense. Our priority is to keep America safe. We must use diplomacy and working through international organizations to prevent unnecessary wars. War should be our last resort, since we cannot defeat the world without destroying ourselves. We have the most powerful weapons in the world. Russia has some too, China has some. We have about 6 or 7 nations that do. But we don't know what will happen if we use a nuclear weapon. We don't know whether we kill other people as well as ourselves. So that's more of a defensive tool than a proactive tool. And so that's the reason Iran and other nations that don't have them give, is they want to have that preventative tool. But Russia and the United States both had atomic weapons during the Cold War, but they both understood the danger of them. And that's why we didn't ever use Russia or the United States used it. And there was few nations that had access to atomic weapons. You look at the bomb that was dropped in World War II in Japan, on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that's very, very small stuff compared to the nuclear weapons we have right now. They will do much, much more damage. And so we got to look beyond that. If we could defeat the world, we could not occupy it. Our defense focus should be on what is in our national interest and not what's in the interest of multinational corporations. Too many of the wars we have participated in stem from the interests of multinational corporations. And the multinational corporation right now, they don't want to pay taxes. They want to create an environment where the middle and working class have to pay the cost for their benefits. This must cease. America must serve as a catalyst and not assume that we are the policeman, the world's policeman. The cost is too great. We need to have a strong defense and use it when it is clearly in our national interest, not the corporation's national interest, unless their interest is compatible with our national interest. We should not be the recruiter for ISIS. We are not loved by the world, stemming from historical manifestation of America's supremacy. And we haven't really dealt fairly with other nations except Great Britain. We are a debtor nation which reduces respect by many nations of the United States. If Russia, China, India, Germany, France, England, and the United States would work together, we could deny ISIS the resources they need to continue fighting. Further, we could influence other nations from contributing to the crisis created by ISIS and encourage nations, national states that do not have nuclear weapons to cease developing nuclear weapons. America has 3 options in this situation. We redesign our foreign policy for the 21st century. America has and America as an indispensable and manifest no other nation can provide the leadership in the world desperately needs our experience in, let me go over that. 3 options is redesign our foreign policy in the 21st century. America as an indispensable nation, which manifests no other nation can provide the leadership the world desperately needs. Our experience in Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, and the promotion of American democracy rather than respect the culture of all nations. And the failure to practice what we preach is an example of failure. The second one is Moneyball America, the application of American foreign policy to maximize return on taxpayers' investment. Set intelligent priorities based on America's strengths and limitations. Believe that the president should safeguard our interests, not exploit American value and America's value. And the only nation that we need to rebuild is America. The United States must serve as a catalyst in building coalitions of willing, able, like-minded nations to block the proliferation of the world's most dangerous weapons and deny terrorists the tools they need to promote terrorism. American foreign policy must promote and protect global growth and ensure that our allies have a stake in stability through commerce and investment. The third option is independent America, a nation that declares its independence from the responsibility to fix the world. What we should remember is we should have learned from Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan which is we cannot win civil wars when we cannot discern who our enemies are. Option number 2, perhaps the best option, with the understanding we should not escalate a fight with Russia over Ukraine. We need a plan for Israel and Palestine to solve that problem, and America does not have hegemony over the world. The last point is, how can we reform American banking system? The first thing we'll look at is American history. We have different opinions in this group about the Federal Reserve System and the banking system. The history of the banking system in the United States is not a good one for many years. Farmers, just like in the Grangers in Texas and the progressive throughout the United States, didn't like banks because if you don't pay your note, they would take your property. So that was, and if you remember the Che rebellions, these were people who had fought in the American Revolutionary War and came home, didn't have money to pay their bank notes, and the bank took their property. And so that's what caused the Che rebellions. We had that period, and when the United States was established as a nation in 1787, there was a national bank created. Alexander Hamilton was eminently involved in that, and he was Secretary of Treasury. We had problems with the bank. Maryland issued a suit in the Supreme Court dealing with this issue, and the Supreme Court cited the supremacy clause, and that you couldn't tax a bank to destroy it. It was McCullen versus Maryland was the name of the case. The National Bank existed and was successful. Andrew Jackson abolished the first national bank, and that created banking chaos because there was no system to deal with what banks are doing. The second national bank was started in order to fund the Civil War, and it functioned fairly well also, and then it led to the 16th Amendment, which was amendment permitting income tax. The Federal Reserve System was established in 1912, and during the Great Depression, there was a major weakness because it didn't have what they call elasticity. It could not get the money to the banks when they needed. And so you had the long lines, and when Roosevelt became president, he had banking holidays which prohibited that. The Federal Reserve System does have that now with the wire system. They get money where it's needed rapidly, but they couldn't do it then, and that's was one of the weaknesses they tried to fix it. Our banking history indicates that when the nation did not have a national bank, we had financial chaos and financial instability. The fact that the Federal Reserve System did not have elasticity led to bank failures preceding the Great Depression and the lack of a Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. The FDIC, that we call it, it insures bank depositors up to $200,000 per person. And you didn't have that before. So if a bank went bankrupt, all your funds were lost, except they go through a process. If they had paid 10 cents on the dollar, that's what you got. If you couldn't pay nothing, you didn't get it. And many state banks were not a part of the Federal Reserve System, not the Federal Reserve System, but the FDIC. All that has changed now. So the FDIC kind of insures depositors that they will get their money back, and so they don't have to get in a long line trying to draw it out if they think the bank is having problems. The problem leading to the 2008 and 09 recession stemmed from legislation abolishing the Glass-Steagall Act, promoted by Senator Phil Gramm from Texas and signed by President Bill Clinton. There were other deregulations of banks and non-banking financial institutions. Non-banking financial institutions they're not regulated like banks. And they do much make as many loans as banks do. And so that's something that adds to the problems we have. Of which the latter is not regulated. The Federal Reserve System had regulations during that time. Mr. Greenspan was the chairman of the Federal Reserve System, but he did two things well. He kept interest rates low and inflation low, but it didn't do any. Another third part of what the Federal Reserve is to work to ensure stable employment opportunity, employment. That very little was done there. But Mr. Greenspan was a fairly honest man, and after the thing was over, he testified for Congress that he erred by not implementing the regulations that were there. The Security and Exchange Commission also had regulation to regulate the stock market. The person that was the chairman of that organization didn't believe in regulation either, so he did nothing. And so the regulations that were there, the people who had the responsibility for administering them didn't do it. So that's what led to this. Also, mortgages. Some people blame HUD, Housing and Urban Development, for it because they did have programs to encourage home ownership, but not to loan someone money when you look at their income against their expenses. It ought to be enough to pay the mortgage. That decision was made by other organizations, and that also contributed to it. They came up with a mortgage security called collateral debt obligation. And we all know what collateral means if we ever borrowed money in our younger age. You had to have collateral if you borrowed money. And if you bought a car, the car would be a collateral. If you bought a home, it would be a collateral. But if you purchased other things, borrowed money for other things, you had to have something of equal value. So if you didn't pay it, they would lose their money. But that wasn't set up. And they came up with extreme examples after the problem where one person, the mortgage monthly payment was more than she earned. And she hadn't bought food or nothing. So she lost the house. So that's why a large number of people lost the house. And some individuals made mistakes of buying much more house than they could afford. Right now, many families whose husband and wife both work, they buy things like homes based on what both of them are working. And if one, for some reason or another, lose their job or become sick, they lose everything. And so those kind of decisions sometimes we make as consumers. And that's our prerogative. But also we ought to understand the consequences of that. And when we had the 2008 and the 2008 in Texas, every bank in Texas went bankrupt. because of speculation in real estate. And, that's when Nation Bank came in, and we had some huge banks. And I had stock in 2 banks, and I lost everything. I didn't have that much, so it wasn't a big loss. But many people lost a great deal in Texas. And so some of that would have happened if we hadn't had the bank and mortgage company bailout in 2008. The issue is, how can we restructure the banking system and non-banking institutions in a manner that will prevent economic recession, prevent them from over-speculating and then coming up with the idea we're too large to fail and we have to go in and bail them out again. We need a new Glass-Steagall Act. We need regulation for banks, mortgage, and non-banking institutions. We need a system to punish credit CEOs of financial and mortgage institutions for violating laws and regulation. That's one of the complaints that Tea Party people have, is these people, these banks that got the money, but the banks paid back all the money plus interest. So we didn't lose, we haven't lost anything. But if they do that, they'll violate the law. And they didn't treat them like they do with me if I'd violate the law. And they should do some prison time for that. And that's one of the complaints that the Tea Party people have. I personally do not have a major problem with the Federal Reserve System or banks. But by the grace of God, if you have about 10 or 12,000 in a checking account, you don't pay no fees or nothing. But if you have $1,000, you pay huge fees and everything. If you don't write a hot check, you have a problem. You don't have a problem. So everybody is similarly situated. The banking system worked pretty well. If I go want to borrow some money, no question, they just say how much. But if you're poor, you can't afford to have a banking account. And so that's some of the problems we have. So that's why. Now, many people complain about the amount of money that the Federal Reserve System has put in society. The Federal Reserve System kind of assists the Treasury Department when they sell securities or buy securities. They do the transaction. And that's when all of the borrowing takes place through that process. So the Federal Reserve does that. But Congress, after the 2008, they passed the $7 billion appropriation to bail out banks and mortgage companies. Many people complain, the people who lost it, some of the people who lost their homes could not get refinanced, because when they go through the refinance process, you had to have enough money to pay the mortgage. They may lower the interest rate 2 or 3 points, but if you didn't have enough money, income, revenue inflow, you couldn't get it refinanced. And that hurt a lot of people. But I don't think the taxpayers want to buy homes for people. So that's kind of a dilemma we had with that. So again, we as consumers have some responsibility. Our economic status would be worse if the Federal Reserve System hadn't done what it did. Because we passed the bank bailout, we passed the Economic Recovery Act, we passed Dodd-Frank's as new regulations to govern banks, and we haven't done nothing since. And the Federal Reserve System hadn't done what it did, the financial status of the nation would be worse than what it is right now. I'm not saying that we don't need some better regulations, sensible regulation, not so that creates an environment so banks and other financial institutions can operate, but prevent them from speculating. The Federal Reserve can deal with that by requiring those banks to have a high reserve requirement. So they have tools to work with that. And at least in 2008 and 2008, before 2008, they didn't apply it. I believe that much of the criticism of banks and the Federal Reserve System stems from misunderstanding and greed, to which public policy ought to create a framework with a fair balance pertaining to laws and regulation governing financial institutions and what is in the public interest. And what's in the public interest is that banks operate efficiently and banks treat customers fairly. And that's what's in our national interest. And that didn't happen, and I hope it happens, but we got to have more than Dodd-Franks. That ends my presentation.
All right.
Yes.
Well, just on, yeah. Just in time, I just got the last bite down, and he said, I'm finished, so it's all gonna work. But as you all know from being here before, this is question and answer time, so any of you have a question, then we'll give you the mic, and you can get it audible and get your question answered.
There's one over there.
Well, Calvin, my question is, where was your main source of research on the first attempts at central banks here in America? I've read things on the establishment of the central banks and of Andrew Jackson and gotten a completely different picture, so that's why I was wanting to know.
Well, I studied in history, and I've studied it also during my farm education. And the first.
Please talk into the mics there.
The first national bank that was established, that was Alexander Hamilton was eminently involved. A nation needed to have some kind of a banking system, and so it was created. Maryland didn't like the bank. That's why we had McCullen versus Maryland challenging it. But it's not because the bank wasn't efficient, but because they didn't want it to operate, and they thought they could levy taxes on the bank, taxes so high that it would destroy the bank. And the Supreme Court said the ability to tax is not to destroy, taxes to raise revenue for a state or a public entity, and not to destroy the institution. And they cited the supremacy clause for it. That bank was successful, and it wasn't that it wasn't successful, it's because a large segment of the population didn't really understand it and was opposed to it, and that's why Andrew Jackson did what he did.
I don't know if you know the answer to this or not, but you
I may not.
a question in my, that I read in the paper recently about when the Panama Papers thing came out. The paper said that some of the investors were terrorist groups. So I wondered if that didn't come about because of the United States and other countries' efforts to, they said they were going to try to wipe out their funds. I wondered if anybody knows how that came about.
I think it wasn't only terrorist groups, as I understand. I read the same article, did a little bit more research on the internet, but it's large number of wealthy Americans who are funneling money through that process so they don't have to pay taxes on the money in the United States.
Yes, that was there, but it did also mention, I didn't mean to exclude the other people, but when it mentioned terrorist groups, I thought, how did this Panama Papers thing get started anyway? Did the United States start investigating where they're putting their monies, or does anybody know?
It could be. It could be that there. I know that's a concern that the government has, and they probably are trying to find out the movement so they can come up with some public policy to prevent it. But the terrorists, it's there, and the people that are serving as mediators, they don't care whether they're terrorists or who they are, as long as they get their fee. So that's what causes that. But what I was indicating, that if these nations get together, they couldn't get no money to circulate because they're not a nation, and they can't create. They more or less get money when they go into Iraq and other places and get the oil, and they sell that, and some of the stuff they've been taking out of the museums, they're selling that. So that's how they get in money. But if those nations that I identified really work together, they could really stop the flow, because if you really found out most of the guns they're getting, if they didn't get them, like they got some from Iraq and some from Afghanistan also. America is the greatest armed merchant in the world. And they may be selling some of those, and that's something we need to try to find out. If that's true, we need to stop it. I don't know whether to answer your question, but that's all I have.
Calvin, what do you think of Bernie Sanders?
Well, what he says sounds good, but he can't do it. America is not, we had one revolution. We're not a revolutionary nation. We have to move there by evolution. The things he's talking about are revolution if he does it. And Congress would never approve it. So it sounds good to people who are hurting. There are people who are hurting. And that's why the study came out about, and it just focused on white male 45 to 55 who worked in manufacturing industry, lost their job, and can't get another job. And those people are bitter. They have given their life 20 and less, sometimes more years, and then to get to the point, it ends and nowhere to go. So there's a lot of disgruntled in America, and we need to try to fix it. And President Obama and most of his State of the Union has asked for money for retraining, but Congress didn't appropriate it, so it didn't happen. So I'm saying Mr. Sanders, he can't, a lot of stuff. Do you think Americans won't give free tuitions for everybody? You would have to come up with a system where if you're rich, you can't do that, and then that becomes hard to administer. If you're going to do it, you got to do it for everybody, and taxpayers won't be willing. That would cause a revolt. So that's not going to happen. In Dallas County, they have a fund that if students who are poor want to go to, they'll pay their tuitions, but the books cost more than the tuition. So if you don't have a book, you're not going to do anything. It's difficult. And what I was talking about in my person, I think the state need to do what it used to do. If taxpayers are paying taxes for education, then the tuition shouldn't be escalating at the rate it is. Yes, there's another question back there. Oh, he hasn't finished.
Yeah, hold on. I'm a little confused because how you told everybody to vote, that's our responsibility, and that's gonna, let's say we agreed with you.
Mm-hmm. And voted for Barry Sanders, he'd win.
So who would you vote for? How would that help? I don't understand really.
Well, I'm saying if people understand, I'm basing it on some. I work in the polls. I worked in the polls a number of times, and I've done everything in the nominating process. I've been in precinct convention and participated in senatorial conventions, state convention, and was on the in 2004. I was on the platform committee for the Democratic Party. And I did that because I was teaching and I wanted to be able to tell students specifically what happened. And working a large number of people you think are astute. In the primary election, they don't know the difference between a primary election and a general election. They want to vote a straight ticket at a primary, and you can't do that. That's the kind of training that I think they need to know. So they will have some way of finding out who they want to vote for. It's difficult in Texas because we have a long ballot, so many names on the ballot. And it takes time to go and vote for each one of those. And when you get to the judges, you don't know any of them. And you find yourself, you want to vote a straight ticket because you don't know. So that's it. The other thing is, in the political discourse, I don't see how a voter can glean any reason to vote, because the Republicans aren't promising nothing but abolish Obamacare, to do away with everything that's been done by the president, and they aren't saying what they're going to replace it with. And the Democrats are, they're divided. Senator Sanders has one approach: do away with it, come up with a new one. If you come up with a new one, you wouldn't have one. Former Secretary Clinton says she wants to reform it, make it work. But, you know, if you're looking at, it's hard to discern. I think the political discourse should deal with issues of how to make our nation better, not to polarize us. The political discourse now polarizes groups by our own misunderstandings, our own fears, and our own bias. And that's not good. That's not good for the nation. Because once that get ingrained, how do you deal with it? And so that's what I'm concerned about. We need to tell the people the truth, both parties, and let the individual make the decision. If they know the truth, I believe they might vote differently, and they might vote more. But the other thing to discourage people from voting is the voter ID. It's strictly designed in Texas and all states is to make it difficult for people potentially to vote Democratic. And that's not right. And that's what it's designed to do, because we have very little corruption in our election. We have a little, but not a great deal. And it's as much with Republicans as it is with Democrats. So redistricting, where you draw gerrymandered districts to benefit a political party like they are in Texas and in all states that are where Republican control. That's not a Republican thing. Democrats did the same thing. They did the same thing, and that's not right. I think we ought to have some kind of a commission to do that rather than the state legislature, because they can't get beyond what they want to do. And the Supreme Court added that to it because several years ago, when the Supreme Court had a decision before it about minority districts. Eddie Bernice Johnson district here, Sheila Lee Jackson district in Houston, and another district in North Carolina. And the Supreme Court says, you know, we're not supposed to prohibit minority groups from electing their own representative, but you can't draw districts that give them a huge majority because they need to have more influence in just that one district. And it went on for the one in North Carolina. It said it's okay to gerrymander a district on behalf of a political party, but it's not okay to do it in. So that's part of what, you know, exacerbated the problem of redistricting. But it's designed to ensure that they win a majority of the seats. And many of the states, and majority of states are controlled by Republicans. It's impossible to win some of those House seats because the votes aren't there for the Democrats. And the Democrats did the same thing. I'm blaming both parties, and I think if we had an independent, bipartisan commission, I believe they'd make better decisions.
Calvin,
Yes.
is the Federal Reserve an agency of the U.S. government, or is it private?
It's called it's a government type corporation. The president appoint board members in the chairman of the Federal Reserve System, but it has a law that it has to operate. Like I said, the three functions: keep interest rate low, inflation low, and stable employment. Those are the three functions. As long as they do a lot of work helping the Treasury because they sell and buy bonds on behalf of the Treasury. So it's a quasi-government organization, not a totally controlled government organization.
Are you aware that since 1913, when the Federal Reserve went into operation, that the value of the U.S. currency, the U.S. dollar, has dropped down to, I think at one point it was at 3 cents. Right now I think it's about 0.3 pennies.
Yeah, I'd heard that. My first focus on that kind of situation was when former Governor John Connally became Secretary of Treasury. And what he did is he let gold float by the market rate, and it went from $43 an ounce to what it is now. And my experience was that when I was stationed in Germany, $1 would buy 4 marks, and mark is like a German dollar, and $1 won't buy a mark right now. the system is set up now in the Western nation, so-called Western nation. You have the European Union, and there were points where the value of the European euro was better than the dollar, and the dollar was better yet. And I think the last couple of weeks, the euro went up, and the Japanese currency went up in relationship to the dollar. But they try to let it float on the value of the dollar in relation to other currencies, and it's pretty difficult. Specifically, what you alluded to, I'm not versed on that.
Calvin,
Yes.
I'm sorry about that. This system is needing a little help. I understand. When I was a teenager, I could fill up a 24-gallon gas tank with 3 silver dollars. You know how many it would take today? 3 silver dollars.
Yeah. The
What
price.
we're looking at is phony fiat money. The Federal Reserve, a private bank, issues money on the computer to give to any source, any recipient it wants. It's never been audited. It can manipulate any corporation it wants. And why should we allow a private banking system to be the banking system of the United States? Thomas Jefferson warned us against that. Why should we do that when obviously the most predominant force in the world today is the combination of greed and lust for power?
Well, that's a good question. I don't consider the Federal Reserve System being totally private, because the policymakers are appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. The second part is the Federal Reserve can create money. The Federal Reserve, if it earns a profit, it goes to the federal government. And the Federal Reserve, what it deals with is 3 tools. The reserve requirement, which requires a certain level of reserve for all banks. That's one. They can increase that reserve requirement, and that will reduce inflation. They can decrease this, and that will stimulate the economy. And that was the intent. And the other one is they can make loans to member banks, and they can charge, like right now, it's virtually nothing. They can make that, and they're making loans on Federal Reserve notes. But the borrowing is really the selling and buying of securities. And the huge debt, they do those transactions for the Treasury Department. And the Federal Reserve is a banker's bank. And that's all they deal with. But their policies affect all of us. They call the other part is open market operation. That's when they buy and sell securities on behalf of the Treasury Department. And that's how we borrow money. The nation borrows money. Now, if there is anything else they do, it's clearly illegal because it's a banker's bank, and everything it does has to be with banks. But the policy is to try to maintain a stable economy, low interest rate, low inflation, and stable employment. That's what it's supposed to be doing.
Calvin, I once came across a book by Ayn Rand. The name of the book was Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. In it, she wrote some of the articles, but she also included articles from her supporters. One of those supporters of Ayn Rand was Alan Greenspan.
He was a disciple of her, yes.
And he wrote about his ideal, which was his understanding of the benefits of the gold standard. So I would put it to you that Greenspan, or maybe I should put this in the form of a question, did Greenspan lose his ideals?
Well, one of the things, my connection with Greenspan goes back to around 1972. And that's when I found out, I knew about Ayn Rand and her position. He was no, not, he really believed in her philosophy as far as capitalism is concerned. And I think his belief in that is why he did not enforce the regulations, particularly that may have led to stable employment. Now, he did a good job. Everybody thought he was the greatest thing there was during the time he was chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, and he was appointed a couple of times for that because he kept interest rate low and inflation low. And so that's what the corporate community wanted. The working community wanted stable employment, and that wasn't done. And so by not dealing with banks when they were making speculative loans, there should have been increasing the reserve requirements that would prohibit that. He didn't do it. And he didn't do it because he believed in Ayn Rand's philosophy. That's my understanding. And, sometimes even I, hear and see what I want to hear and see. So my wife accused me of that a lot of times. I can hear you. I can hardly hear you. Go ahead.
Isn't the Federal Reserve owned by the member banks?
Lights on.
What was the question now? I didn't hear it.
Isn't the Federal Reserve owned by the member banks?
No.
Yes, it is.
No, it isn't.
Yes, it is. They have to buy stock and be a member.
It's really not a stock company. It's a quasi-government organization. You may have read that, and I'm not saying you didn't, but I haven't read that.
Well, what I've read is, if you want to be a member of it, you have to buy stock.
Well, state banks are, not a member of the Federal Reserve. What I'm talking about, I haven't read that, so I can't answer that. What you're saying may be true. I haven't read that. But I'm not saying you're wrong. But I haven't read that. My understanding, it was not a stock company. But you do have to do something to be a member in what they control, the reserve requirements, the rediscount, which is loans to member banks. They control that in open market operations. And those are the tools that the Federal Reserve has. But I'm certain you may have to pay something, but it's not stock. My study says it's not stock, but I may be wrong. Yes.
I still have the same question. I'm going to say it a different way. Okay, you stated the problems pretty clearly. You stated a vision of how things go to the next step better. I don't see how we're going to do that. How do you see us doing that?
Well, at the outset, I said the first one I dealt with was critical. If we don't do that, the other four are not going to happen. We got to get back to the premise of what a representative democracy is. And a representative democracy is supposed to be based on reason. It doesn't mean you can't disagree. We can disagree, but we ought to disagree based on real issues and not ideology.
Same question. That nobody would argue with. However, how do you get from now to there?
Well, I'm saying we as citizens, we've got to recognize our responsibility and not be misled and be polarized into, so that we can be divided and conquered. If we don't do that, we're going to get more of what we have. Because the system is set up in a representative democracy for people to be informed. In a representative democracy, you can't really have people that's uninformed. If you do, you don't have a representative democracy because people don't vote, or don't know what they voted for. Like Texas, we have the lowest lowest rate of voting in any state in the United States. And it's because the voters don't get anything, we don't get up and read, and everybody thinks that the government is corrupt, and so that's what we have. But it's some of the problems with the government. The government needs to do things better than what we are doing. And the other is, we the citizens don't exercise our responsibility. And we ought to know, we just can't be concerned about, most people are not concerned with other things that happen to other people. Then when it happened to us, then we are very, very concerned. And so that's not a balanced process. And we got to recognize that what hurts one group eventually will hurt us all. And we need to seek answers to what's best for our community, not what's best for me, because I feel that
Hello? Okay, earlier in your presentation, you were talking about the fact that we have the best Congress that money can buy. Okay, along that line of thought, other than reversing Citizens United, what would you propose that we do to bring back our democracy?
well, I indicated that we should get the Supreme Court to reverse its decision on Citizens United or pass a constitutional amendment reversing it. That was one thing. The other thing is we need to reenact a Glass-Steagall Act that's a little bit larger than what it was before. And we need to regulate banks and seem like some people feel that the Federal Reserve System doesn't have enough regulation. Then we perhaps need to make those changes too. I was speaking as far as what it does and what it's supposed to do was pretty much on the mark, except stable employment, which led to the recession we have. The government, public policy should protect us all. And that's what we haven't had any public policy since 2010. Nothing has been passed unless it's been forced on budgetary issues that were forced. They didn't want the government to close down, so it was forced. But very little else has been done since 2010. And the Congress has got to do better. And voters have got to elect people who are going to do what's best for all of us and not just for a few. And that's why I said that first part is very important. We should not let people, if I'm going to hate somebody, I ought to do it based on my own experience. I shouldn't hate somebody else based on what somebody else said. And that's something I've tried to do all my life. I don't hate nobody, because if you hate someone, you hurt yourself more than you do them. So I just think we got to wake up and recognize that we are all in this together, and we need to have a system so we all can be successful if we desire to be. That's all I can say to that question.
Calvin,
Yes.
the research you've done on this, I think, is very thorough from your point of view. I hold a different point of view, but I do admire the thoroughness of your presentation today. I think you've brought something to the table here. You're talking about getting away from divisiveness in this country and polarization. What do you personally see as the issues that we can all come together on?
That's hard.
I hadn't thought about that one. I really think most people want a level playing field. They don't want one group to have advantages of another. I think we can get agreement on that. I think most people think we ought to have a good education system. I think we can get a consensus on that. I think we can get some consensus on certain economic issues like infrastructure. That determines the value of a nation, your infrastructure. You look at our dams, our roads, our bridges, our rail systems. They all gonna have problems because they don't have money. And that's an investment, it's not welfare. We will get a return, the nation will get a return from that. And that will create jobs. I think we can get a consensus on, from the people, on job retraining, because we have a structural unemployment. And the types of jobs that exist 30 and 20 years ago, they're not coming back. There are other jobs being created in the tech area. It requires training, but people need to have the retraining so they can do those jobs. And that's what the companies are That's why they bring people in from Asia that have the skills, because we don't have the skills. The president of Apple said that's why he's moved his factories to China, is because we didn't have the skills to do it. And so I think those are some issues we can get some, and I think we could really get a consensus on healthcare. But the way it's polarized is, people don't know, and healthcare is very complicated. The only way I have a little knowledge is I worked in it for so many years. And so that's what that's what I base my experience on. I recognize we all see things differently. Our interpretations are different, and it's all based on our experience, and I respect, that's who we are, is what our experience are, and I understand that.
This is related to the last question. I don't think we had a consensus on the banker bailouts, on the Iraq war.
No, we didn't. There was no consensus on it. It
On
wasn't.
TPP, it goes on and on.
No.
Basically, that's my source of confusion. How are we going to implement any of this stuff when we have had consensus among the people that was just overruled, and we've been manipulated? Anyway, I don't know how.
Well, I'm going to deal with I know more about the North American Free Trade Agreement than I do. I understand it's the same kind of agreement we have with South Korea, Panama, and Colombia, the same kind of agreement. And I know there's a movement to have similar agreements in all of Central and South America. Now, historically, planning was not something we thought government should do. That's socialism, that's communism. And the federal government has backed away from doing that. NAFTA is the creation of large corporations who felt that if they relocated factories in Mexico, and that's been going on since they call it something else they had. They used to build factories right across the border from Del Rio and Brownville. Yeah, and that's where it got started. And they felt that if you built those factories there and those jobs would pay, better, and most people in Mexico would want to stay in Mexico, they'd stay there. But as soon as they started doing it, they found that multinationals said, well, we can do better in China. And so that was never realized. And we have a deficit with both Canada and Mexico. And it seems to me that we feel that the United States is invincible, and we can do things like that to help other nations, but we need help ourselves. We have a growing population of dependent people. And I think the government should explain these things to people. You just can't have, two sides. The labor union say, no, don't do it, we're going to lose jobs. And we have lost jobs, and the labor union was correct. I think we need to build into those agreements some protection for the people who work in those countries, and then it will create an environment so we can be more competitive. We don't think about, our limitations and our strengths, it seems to me, when we negotiate these. We came out of World War II saying tariffs were not good. So we've been trying to move away from that, and we haven't found the correct balance. I don't know what's in the TPP. I don't know enough to talk about it. And I've heard what many people have said in here about it, and I know that it's, I think congressmen can have access if they want it, but the general public did not have access because
The question was about consensus.
there was no consensus at all because they didn't ask us.
It's online now, you can read it.
Yeah. I'm gonna let you read it and tell me about it.
I did read it.
Yeah, you made a report on it. You made a report on it.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Do you really believe that the motivating factor for moving corporations outside of the United States was to help those people in those poor countries?
I believe it in Mexico because we were doing it before. What he pointed out.
Good grief.
Yeah, I mean that's what I don't think when President Clinton signed that or promoted it, I don't know whether he knew that.
He knew the giant sucking sound would come. Don't tell me he didn't.
I don't know what he knew, but it wasn't. It's proven to be not good for the United States.
Okay, are we done with questions?
Is that all the questions? Excuse me. Is that all the questions, gang?
Turn it down a little bit.
Yes, question.
One more? You're saying that the Federal Reserve is semi-quasi.
Semi-government.
But if you look in the phone book, you cannot find it anywhere in the government pages. That's because it is not part of our government. It's a privately held international banking cartel, owned and run and controlled by the world's super rich elite, the upper 1% of the upper 1% who control everything and own everything and everybody through the power of money, period.
I can't argue about the power of money, but I don't know how foreign investors involved in the Federal Reserve System. It's a national bank for the United States, kind of like the Bank of England and other national banks in other nations. It's structured a little different. You know, I'm limited by what I've read, and so you may be right.
You want to find it in the government pages, you can't.
Well, we have the law, don't we? Then the law says it's a quasi-government thing.
The law says one thing, the reality is another.
Well, I know that's true in a lot of things, but see, if we are always as wise as you are, then we wouldn't stand for that.
Shoot, thanks.
I'll give Calvin a hand. He presented a whole variety of topics to us tonight, which we're grateful for, and we still have some time left on the clock. For if any of you want to come up and spend 5 minutes at the podium, come on up. You're welcome to do that, and we'll take several comments tonight and reach our brains some more. You can agree with Calvin. You can add to what Calvin has said. You can disagree with Calvin has said. So just be nice about it.
It's hard to be nice sometimes. Calvin, that was a nice presentation. You have researched. I would encourage you to research in other areas, though, that are outside of what you think is established truth. I've stated this several times before, and I'll state it again, that a friend of ours, John knew him quite well as well, one day went to a yard sale and, to make a long story short, bought a box of books that was the manuals of the board of directors of the Federal Reserve System. The man's wife sold them to him because he had passed away and he was the director of the Federal Reserve here in Dallas, chairman here in Dallas. Well, she didn't realize what those were. And Terry bought these. He had a cold chill go down his back. And he got so angry when he started reading them that he bought literally a pallet of binders and started printing up about 450 pages and selling them at cost. Now, I remember a few things from having read in some of those manuals. All of this stuff that they tell us and even write in the law about the national interest that we have in the Federal Reserve and what it is to us and all is pure BS. It states in there clearly, and I read this, that the chairman of the board of the Federal Reserve System is supreme in power over the President of the United States, the Congress of the United States, and the judicial branch of the United States. That man is the dictator of the United States. And the fact that he is appointed is all carried on to make us believe the story about what that organization is. It's part of the international banking system. Read the book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, The Creature from Jekyll Island, The Creature from Jekyll Island. If you haven't read it, you're totally uneducated on banking. Money Masters is a video set you can get that goes into it very well. These are the two best treaties I know of the banking system historically worldwide and how the Federal Reserve fits into it. Thomas Jefferson, again, I've stated this 100 times, stated that if we ever let a private bank get control of our money, our currency, that through inflation and deflation and the corporate structure that will grow up around the bank, They will end up stealing all the property from our descendants and leaving them homeless in the land that we have founded. That man was brilliant. Thomas Jefferson was learning foreign languages at the age of 5. If you read the Federalist Papers and then the Anti-Federalist, I forget what the title of those are, you will realize these were passed out on the streets to try to influence people who were going to vote on things. And I would have to say that most Americans today are not well educated enough to understand what they're reading. Our educational system has gone straight to hell. There's a book on that subject called Outcome-Based Education that I've mentioned a number of times. The Guggenheim Foundation funded a group of educators to design an educational system to implement throughout the United States called outcome-based education that dumbs the students down. We've gone from being number 1 in the world to 40 some odd. We have gone from number 1 in the world of educated students to 40 some odd in the world since the Guggenheim Foundation put that thing together. Our system is dumbed down, and now we're into second and third generations of that, so who's to know? Who's to understand it? We need to delve into things that are beyond what we are taught, far beyond it. And if it doesn't fit with what you believe, then go after it so that you can prove that it's wrong or right. You know, years ago, I would be in a conversation with a friend, and I may be 90% in agreement with them, but there's one little thing that maybe they've got the answer to, so I take the opposite course. And I think we need to train ourselves to do this, not to even be comfortable with what we believe in, because what we believe in is going straight to hell right now. If these globalists take over with the power that they have, then we are going to see a dark ages 10 to 100 to 1,000, who knows, times worse than the Middle Ages and all of their mass murders under the guise of religion and all this spiritual stuff. We need to wake up, folks. This Federal Reserve System is part of the international banking system. And a lot of what we are taught in the news media that is totally owned by them is false. Let's go back to what Jimmy and Joanne Moriarty brought out about Libya. They had a gold-backed dinar, not fiat money, that our Constitution mandates we have, that it's defined as an ounce of silver, our dollar, and that Congress shall maintain the value of the American dollar, not a private bank. And it is a private bank. The fact that it has federal on it as Federal Reserve just makes us think it's part of the government just about as much as Federal Express. It's no different from that as far as relating to it. I think that the United States, and hence the world, is on the precipice of total disaster. And I think we cannot believe our politicians because they're not ours. They're all bought. We need to do what Iceland did. Somehow, something symbolic of this. They took thousands of people with pots and pans and spoons and surrounded their Congress halls and beat these pans, thousands of people, night and day until it drove the entire government out. They then held public elections and elected a new government, and they've got, the last I read, 26 of their bankers in prison now for the crimes that they perpetrated. We need to do that. Our banking system is the most criminal organization on earth, and we need to recognize that. It is an absolute violation of our Constitution, and the research has been done. It never was voted in as an amendment to the Constitution. And the IRS went right along with it. We think that when we pay our taxes, that this goes to running the government. The government runs on constitutional money from imports and sales taxes and things like that, import duties. The Federal Reserve loans money to the federal government. Why should we have a private bank loaning us money when they get the money off the computer? Or they run a printing press and print it up by the boxcar load? Why should we pay interest on that? That's what we're paying, and all the income tax basically goes to pay that interest to those private bankers. Biggest scam in the history of mankind. and we're sound asleep to it. We believe our government leaders. Oh, yes, Sally, I hear you. I'll vote for that in Congress and all that BS. We believe it. These people need to be top to bottom driven out of office, and we need to put a government back in on the foundation of our Constitution. We need to do that. And if we don't do it, then all of our futures are really gone. These people who are in the upper levels that we don't even see a lot of them, who run this world, putting in the globalists, putting in the Trans-Pacific Partnership and things like this, they are all very occult. I've said this before. I've done research on it, and I think that I know what I'm talking about. Being occultists, they have to tell you what they're going to do ahead of time. Otherwise, they're guilty. But they do it in a way that is so codified you'll never get it. But still, that excuses them. So they have no sense of guilt for all the harm they cause humanity. If you go to Wikipedia on the internet and look up Georgia Guidestones, the first premise that's put up on, it's like a little mini Stonehenge in Erath County in Georgia. Georgia Guidestones. The first premise is maintain the earth at a sustainable population of under 500 million. Now that, to get there from here, is about 7 billion killings of human beings. And if you don't think they mean that, you're sound asleep. You're school children, believing what you're taught. And what you're taught is lies so that you will be manipulated. There's nothing comfortable about the realities of what's controlling this world. Nothing comfortable about it at all. Learn that, live with it, and help do something about it. I think one of the most powerful instruments that we do have is individual prayer. If we really know what our Creator is, and that it's omnipresent and omnipotent, and we utilize those facts and annihilate those evil beliefs in our own consciousness, our individual thought process is part of humanity. And when we have strong thoughts, we influence people all over the world. This goes on all the time. We may not believe that, but I'm totally convinced is fact. I could go on and on with this, but I think what we need to do is wake up, because we are sound asleep in this country.
Next up.
Well, I thought Hank would be next up, but I guess it's me. I worked 8 years in the corporate world. Before that, I'd owned my own business, and over a 4.5-year period had about 60 employees come through my employment. But then I went to work in the corporate world for 8 years, and I learned how government works. I took my assignments, did my jobs, whatever the schedule was, whatever the deadlines, I rose to those challenges. Other people were hired on after I was. They were doing something I didn't quite understand. It was kind of like a calculated incompetence. But as I watched over the years, those individuals who didn't perform their jobs ended up running whole departments. And here I was, still by myself, just doing my thing and completing every assignment. And that's really how government works. One of the things that Calvin didn't really say, but he said it in many words, is statism. A belief in the benignity of the state. I find that government really, that thing that is supposed to be all benefit for us, is really a psychopathic, self-interested weirdo who is always scheming. I mean, it doesn't really matter who goes through those doors, who we elect, who we put in. They all seem to get this virus, this mentality of self-interest of government and how it's going to benefit them and their clique And so we have this ongoing pathology which has only gotten worse over time. We talk about having the best politicians money can buy. Well, friends, it's been that way for ages. We go back, Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton, it's really interesting. I think he wrote some fairly decent Federalist papers, but then when it came to his self-interest in the banking, he was right there for supporting an elite group. Now, we had just broken away from Great Britain, and really we're a British colony that had gained its freedom. And here you have the same elitism coming back in. Some of the writers on the American frontier, one wrote about America being the great melting pot, where people from any class or station in Europe could come to America and they could become a new man, an American. And that American had no limits of class distinction. But yet, somehow, later on, we started getting these European philosophies coming in, especially collectivism, Marxism, where everything is spoken of in terms of class. And we're instructed that we belong to a class. And this is really how we have been divided. We are in America divided. And I put the question to Calvin, how we unite, how we come together. I think we can only do that when we break this class, this distinction at that level, and go back to being individuals and being empowered individuals who know how to say to those around us who would regulate, those around us who would make new rules on a constant basis, to be able to say, I would prefer not to. I would rather do my thing, and I would rather not participate in this big regulation fest. Now, this meeting is really not about the TPP, but the TPP, from what I understand, and Jim says he's read it, maybe he can present on it, it establishes an advisory, basically a level above our government, which not only has regulation powers and has its own courts to hear its own issues, but in fact it can remake the rules as it goes along. It really has no restraints. I would go back to some interview with Greenspan. That's got to be that mic there. Yeah. Maybe turn it off. We don't need it anymore, I don't think. Greenspan was being interviewed and asked, I believe by Congress, he was being asked something about, well, who has oversight of the Federal Reserve? And he was saying, well, really, no one has the authority to regulate us. Greenspan was very adamant about that. So that kind of brings me back to Ralph Epperson. I was discussing some of Ralph Epperson's work with some friends a few days ago. And Epperson wrote a book called The Unseen Hand. And it boils down to the happenstance view of history versus the conspiratorial view of history. We're in a situation where since the inception of the Federal Reserve, we've been paying for our currency. But it's like you go back to The Art of War with Sun Tzu. It's actions like that have consequences. You cannot get taken, you can't get hoodwinked and not expect there to be consequences to it. all that money, an ocean of money, an ocean of cash, even if it's like first use of currency, where they're creating it on the front end and it's devaluing as they increase the supply, by various means, they've had an ocean of wealth. The Federal Reserve shareholders, and by the way, private citizens, Americans, can't be shareholders of the Federal Reserve, but there are shareholders of the Federal Reserve. Maybe they are represented as banks.
The member banks.
Well, that's the outer layer. There are shareholders. There's a whole set of shareholders. But I'm getting off point here. The thing is that ocean of cash went, I would put it to you, went to an enemy of America, an enemy of the American philosophy, an enemy of our way of life. And that money is now coming back around and is being used as a weapon. And I think you are going to see in the coming months, in the coming year, some things happen you never would have guessed, where that international influence is being brought down upon our heads, and we no longer have the liberty and the national sovereignty that we had previously. And I think we can expect that. One of the things coming in the banking world is something called the, see if I can get the pronunciation right, Albert, is it Basel III? Basel III requirements. And I think the Basel III, I'm not sure really, it's basically the world saying to America, you can't pull this fiat currency thing on us anymore. America, the devaluation of the American dollar, which is not real evident to us, has really brought down the economies of the world. And I think we're going to see a revaluing of the American dollar, a devaluing of the American dollar on the international scene. And I don't know how obvious it will be, how soon here, but look for it. Now the Basel III requirements are to have currency that is asset-backed, because it's now being recognized. I mean, you know, you can only steal so long. Okay. And I think I just got my, I think I ran out of time here. Anyone else want to speak? Okay.
Thank you for that presentation, Calvin. I consider you special because you're the most humane person amongst us regulars, and I appreciate that. And still, I'm gonna have a lot in common with what you're saying. Before there was hope and change, there was tragedy and hope. You know what I'm talking about? Tragedy and hope. It's a famous book about the insiders, the elite that pull the strings, that are above the candidates that we elect, and sometimes that we don't really elect but are get in there anyway. So I hate to say this because I'm looking for a positive thing. I kind of like your positive way, the energy you bring, and there's something about all this anger and all this doom and gloom, but neither side seems to really know how to get out of it. That was my main question to you. Like, really, how are we going to do this? And you kind of didn't really answer that directly. I don't see it, but you are correct in saying that we have to be more educated. Democracy doesn't work with ignorant public that's easily manipulated. Emotionalism. I agree with our super conspirators, because that we are manipulated at a level that's new with the modern sophistication of media and their ability to lie and control all the media. But not just that, technologically it took a big leap last year. I don't know when it happened, but I saw it last week I think it's pretty new. In real time, they can make it look like I'm talking and I'm saying black is white, and they'll say white is black. They have this thing where you can make a person smile. Look it up. It's got George Bush talking, and in real time, this guy's going like this. He's making faces, and he's saying different things, and it looks like George Bush is saying it. No, it's not. It's way beyond Photoshop. You know what I'm talking about?
I read that article.
It's a short video. This guy's making faces and doing stuff like this, and whatever he's doing, could be Clinton, could be Bush, it could be you, it could be me. It's in real time, and they're changing it. So what possible use could they have for that technology except for fraud? Anyway, I don't have the answers either. So we have to maintain our sanity, our positive ways. I have a different background than Calvin. Calvin's had a lot of success in government. He's had a good life. I came up ripe for questioning these things. Unfortunately, they pan out a lot more. I mean, starting with Santa Claus. I mean, I was like, why is everybody lying? Why what's this thing where and so I just, that's just the way I am. I just don't accept things when they're lies. Anyway, so I value this group, and I really appreciate what you're doing, and probably we all should look at each other's information more. So, thank you.
Short presentation about TPP.
Once you get up and give us the closing when Jim gets finished.
Well, I did read it, and it took me 2 days to read the definitions part. Like bank means, and all that kind of stuff. And it took me about another week to read the rest of it. And here's what it is. I mean, and they've got, the TPP is the one they're going to vote on pretty soon, but there's some more similar agreements for Europe and other parts of the world. If they pass, here's what it is. It's world government without any, it's corporate world government. I don't think anybody wants that. But the part about the courts, a foreign company could sue the United States government over policy, and it's in a private tribunal. There is no appeal process, period, none. So if some outfit in China says, we don't like it because you're inspecting our beef, they can sue the government and get that, and then they won't be able to inspect beef, or medicine, or they can sue for anything. And it's not new. So far, us taxpayers have paid out $500 million to reimburse legal fees by entities in Mexico. So it's nothing new. Now, and these trade agreements, they didn't just pop out of nowhere. People realized, look, we can make a lot of money if we can manufacture overseas and sell over here without tariffs. That process began right after, the end of World War II. And there were a few trade agreements, during the 60s. You remember when you first started seeing Panasonic and Sony, that was in the 60s. Then in the early 70s, all of a sudden you see, Japanese cars taking big shares out of the market. It was all designed to increase profits at the expense of the American workforce, and that's it. And the American workforce has suffered a great deal over it. And like my friend Al, who I always agree with, said, this country's in deep trouble. Folks, I'll be surprised if we make it the next 20 years. I really will. And I'm glad I won't be here to witness it. We, us old timers, we were born at the right time in history.
Now, I've informed that it's time to close this out. I'm not going to try, I really defend everybody's prerogative to think what they believe they should think. I don't try to force my perception on anyone else. And I appreciate all the comments you made. Some of the information, a lot of it I haven't read, and perhaps I should read outside the box, but perhaps we all should. And that's about it. Thank you for listening.
Well, all right, gang, thank you so much for coming out tonight. We've enjoyed your presence. We've enjoyed our speaker tonight. Like some of you said, he's always easy to listen to and bring some good information for us. Miss Tom and Susan tonight, they should be on the boat heading down one of the rivers in the Netherlands right now. And I think the plan is to be back in town on Thursday, so they should be back in the saddle again next week. Have a good program next week. Our speaker, who's coming next week, has spoken to us before. He's going to come back and give us some additional facts and information, and we'll see how that works out. And then we have several other good schedules out after that. I gave everybody a program tonight, so I'm not going to drag you through the schedule, but thanks again for coming this evening. Welcome to go home. Retire to the main dining room, whatever your pleasure is, but thanks again for being here, and have a good evening.
I enjoyed your presentation, especially because I wanted to hear you.